Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger, and I'm just helping people who are scared. I have a bit of a theological background, not studied it, but my parents were both missionaries, and the book, the house was full of books of theological texts, and I read quite a lot of them myself, being personally interested in the subject, although I didn't actually study theology. And so anyway, I this is about these people who keep saying over and 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 over again that Jesus is about to return, and they're never right. It's happened so many times. Can't count even on all my fingers and all my toes and anything. You'd have to count many different times in order to get to the number of false prophecies that we've had to debunk. And so the main central point, and not just in 5 years, and the central point is that nobody knows the day or hour. That's what it says in the Bible. The angels in heaven don't know, and the Son himself doesn't know, only the Father knows. And it doesn't say, no one knows the day or hour, but the Father left a puzzle in the Bible for you. And if you solve that puzzle, you can learn what the Father knows, and what even the angels and what Jesus don't know. It doesn't say that. It's nothing like that. It's nothing even remotely like that. And who could have left that hint? I mean, the authors of the Bible couldn't do it, the angels couldn't do it, Jesus couldn't do it, and God wouldn't do it. Because it says clearly that nobody knows, and he's not going to tell anyone. And anyway, if there was a puzzle, why wouldn't angels be able to solve it? It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't fit together. Why would the latest false prophet be able to do it? And nobody else in the last so many thousand years. Another thing I talk about later on here, these false prophets always look in the Bible, and nearly all of them, they find a date that's just a few weeks, months or years in their future. I don't find anyone looking in the Bible and saying, oh, Jesus is going to return in the year 3052 or something. And in the same way, back in the time of Jesus, and they didn't find the year 2000. You didn't get people looking in the Bible in the 1st century AD and saying, oh, I look in the Bible, oh yes, what Jesus really meant when he told us he was going to return in our generation is that he's going to return in the year 2020. And you don't see that. There aren't any ancient writings from the 1st century saying that looking in the Bible and finding the date 2020, or whatever the date that they want to say, they just always find it in their own generation. And so then we get down to the passage as to why, what I'm based on. If you go and look at the generation thing, it says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all has taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So he says that the very generation of the people he's talking to, at least that's the obvious way to understand that. But ever since then, people, because he didn't seem in any obvious sense to return, people since then have been puzzling over what can he have meant by that. Because he doesn't seem to have returned then, and generation after generation they say, oh, he must be our generation. And then he doesn't return that generation. Next generation says, oh, he must be our generation. And the year 100,000 and the year million, people will say, oh, well, he must be our generation. I mean, that's where it's been going, sort of thing. And so we've had false prophets for 2,000 years already, and nearly all have dates in their own lifetimes. Of the ones we've had to debunk, only 2 that weren't. And one was the Isaac Newton, and he didn't predict the end of the world in 2060. He said, well, that Jesus returned, more strictly. He was, at his time, there were, just like today, there were so many people telling false prophecies about Jesus returning. And in order to try and counteract that, he said, well, according to their very out-of-date theology now, but as they thought about it back then, they thought in Newton's time that the Pope was the Antichrist, and that the Pope would last for 1,000 years, and the papacy would last for 1,000 years and then end. And then he thought after that 1,000-year period, then Jesus would return, and he couldn't return until the papacy had ended. People don't have that view anymore, but back at the time of Newton they did. And so he said, well, look at this. The papacy started back then. We've got 1,000 years to go. So he's obviously not going to return. so stop all your false prophesying. And he said he'd only done after that, not at that date. Then later on he revised that. He changed his idea of when the papacy started. And he said, oh well, he'll have to come back sometime after 2016. But people are now still use the 2060 date because it's now future and the 2016 isn't. So that's basically what happened. To get people saying he's going to return in 2060. It's nothing to do with science. It's nothing to do with Newton the scientist. It's Newton the now very out of date theologian. Another one is this last pope, who's actually a very early example of fake news. This thing was clearly invented in 1590 because it did remarkable prophecies all the way through to 1590, and then from 1590 or afterwards the accuracy just falls off a cliff. So someone in 1590 forged this document and claimed that they'd found a very early document by an early saint, and then he forged all those prophecies up to 1590, which make it seem very impressive, and then people start to believe it because of that. But it's obviously a forgery. Lots of internal evidence is a forgery, and those are the only ones I know of that are Christian prophecies for our time, apart from ones by people in our time. Now, I'm going to look at some particular groups. You can read this for all the details. So first of all, view of the Catholics. Again, just as with all the main religions, the archbishops, the heads of the churches, in the case of the Catholic Church, the Pope, and none of them prophesy the future. They don't give these false prophecies. And the Pope himself doesn't know when Jesus is going to return. And Jesus doesn't know, so of course these false prophets don't know. Now, so the Catholics say that Jesus is waiting for all of Israel to become Christian. The way they put it actually is the glorious Messiah's coming is suspended at every moment of history until its recognition by all Israel, for hardening has come upon part of Israel in their unbelief towards Jesus. So for as long as there are parts of Israel where people don't believe in Jesus, then he's not going to return, according to the Catholic Catechism. So Catholics don't have to believe everything it says in the Catechism. It's a kind of a guide to guide your thought and help with your interpretation of the Bible. But that's a reasonable that's a kind of centralist kind of position view in the Catholic Church, is that Jesus is not going to return until his recognition by all of Israel. You go and look at Israel, and Israel is Palestinian and Jewish, and there's no sign at all that it's anywhere close to all of Israel recognizing Jesus. So if you're Catholic, then it's pretty clear you're thinking in terms of a long future thing. So, because I say that particularly because I get lots of Catholics who read these rapture stories and think that Jesus is going to return quickly. They don't know that their church has rejected the rapture and doesn't find it in the Bible, and they don't know that their church has this in their own catechism, because not many people read their catechism. Then they don't know that that's in the catechism. So for those of you who are Catholics, then definitely your church does not say this, and all these false prophecies are very much against your church's own statements. And then there's this idea of the rapture, which is it developed in the 19th century in the United States. There was a precursor a little bit earlier, this chap, I forget what date he was. And this is a belief that Jesus is going to kind of come back temporarily, not land on the earth, hover in the clouds, physically in the clouds. He's going to be standing up in the clouds. And that people on the earth, then some people think they're just going to vanish and reappear in heaven without dying, and people think that they're going to levitate, float up slowly into the air and go up into the clouds, and somehow get into heaven by doing that. And that is a very widespread belief in the Bible Belt, but it's a minority belief even there. Most Christians in Bible Belt, United States, don't believe this, but a very sizable minority do have this belief. And so that's the idea of the rapture. The idea is that he hovers in the clouds, then people all go up, float up in the air, and then he goes way again for 1,000 years. There's 1,000 years of peace in which everyone follows, and there's a series of 7 years of hardship, and 1,000 years of peace during which everyone is following Jesus, and finally he returns at the end of that. And there are various variations on this scenario, but this is only believed in Bible Belt, United States, and in a few isolated pockets outside of that. I did a rough calculation, and between 4 and 6% of Christians worldwide have this particular belief. And if you're a Catholic in particular, and any of the really large established churches, except the Baptist and Methodist, I think, isn't it? I get a little bit mixed up about this. Oh no, I didn't mean to do that. Just wanted to make sure that I've got the right number. Right. Oh yes, here it's come up. Yeah, Baptists and Pentecostalists. Sorry, not the Methodists. I shouldn't have. I thought I'd slipped somewhere. The Baptists and the Pentecostalists believe this, and 46% of Christians and 1% of the population of the world. And if you go to the United States, then it's a majority there that don't have this belief, even in the United States. Baptists and Pentecostalists, yes. And so they're the ones who tend to believe that. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses have a somewhat similar belief, but they don't call it the rapture, and they don't think that Jesus appears in the sky. They have a different kind of view on it. But most people don't believe this, and they don't find this in the Bible. And all the way through, from the time of Jesus, all the way through to the 18th century or so, or whenever that chap was, or it actually says there, I've got the date here, let's try and find his date, find that chap's date. He was in, he thought 1590s, so the 17th century, but in 1590, the idea, he thought Jesus would return 48 days, I think he said, before then it's become 1,000 years, as the idea has gradually evolved. And it all goes back to a passage in 2 Thessalonians, where actually it talks about Jesus appearing in the clouds, and most people interpret that he just comes straight on down to the ground. And then other people think of this as being that just Jesus arises in some appears in some sense, but the phrase referring to meeting him in the clouds was kind of a phrase of respect in those days, and doesn't necessarily mean physically in the clouds. So there are various views on this, but there's nothing to say. And then there's a whole long, very enigmatic book of Revelations, and then people get these ideas by taking this passage in a completely different place and putting it in the book of Revelations. But if that's what the book of Revelations meant, why didn't the book of Revelations say that Jesus would return temporarily and go away again and then come back again? And it doesn't say that. Not in the book of Revelation. So they get this idea by taking this idea from a completely different book, which again doesn't say he's going to go away and come back again. And then they kind of slot them together to get this belief. And the Pentecostalists and the same groups of people, and the Baptists. Oh, it is the Baptists. What did I get wrong? The Baptists and the Pentecostalists. Anyway, the Baptists and the Pentecostalists, they are the ones who have this, and they find it in the Bible, but nobody else finds it in the Bible. So that's that. And this is about the ones who don't. And then so now I'm going to look at, for instance, the views of the Church of England. Then Church of England interprets just about everything in the book of Revelation historically, and that's quite a common view amongst theologians. So all this thing that they're seeing as being in the future, and the tribulation and everything, they see as being past, as happened in the 1st century AD, and including the number of the beast and all that thing about the mark of the beast and everything. They see all that too as happening in the 1st century, and being to do with the tribulations of the first Christians and the difficulties they had with the Romans, and the number of the beast is the Emperor Nero. And so the thing to bear in mind is that when we read the book of Revelation, it is all very enigmatic, but for them it would have been extremely familiar. They would have known what it meant, and we are left piecing together clues from fragments of understanding. They would have been as familiar, as he put it, as familiar as the story of Red Riding Hood and the 3 bears. Imagine people using stories like that in the teaching, then we would know instantly what it meant. But say 1,000 years from now, people say Red Riding Hood. Why are they talking about someone wearing a Red Riding Hood? What's that got to do with anything? And then they'd be puzzling away. And if supposing the story hasn't survived, or not very much of it has survived or something, then they wouldn't have a clue what it was about. So these kind of, sometimes it's ending, but it's pretty much, so a lot of it sorted out, and some of it's still enigmatic, but it would have been straightforward to the people of the day. It wouldn't have been the puzzles it is today. That's what he's saying there anyway. And he's saying, and his interpretation, everything else in the book of Revelation has already happened, but the second coming hasn't yet happened. So now, other views on it. Well, when I was Christian, then I was associated with I never became a member of the Friends, but I was brought up Christian, and I used to attend the Quakers, as did my parents, and I explained all that about the Harlem missionaries. And so I didn't know at the time. I did know that, I never myself believed in the second coming as a literal future event. I did believe in the resurrection. I didn't believe in the second coming when I was a Christian. I did believe take the resurrection literally. I didn't believe in the second coming when I was Christian. And but it's interesting to know, I didn't have the kind of reason. Now nobody ever asked me, do you believe this? I don't think anyone ever asked me. And it's not the sort of thing we talked about at home or anything like that. It just doesn't come up much in when people talk about Christianity in the United Kingdom. It's not a big topic of conversation. So I don't think we ever talked about it. But anyway, so I was interested to find out that, and if you go and look at the Amazon bookshelf in the United States, is full of what you call it, eschatology, the return of Jesus and the end times theology. If you go and look at the Amazon.co.uk, there are a few books, but they don't have a separate section for it. And really is much less interest on that topic here. Maybe there's a bit more now because of all the sensationalist press stories. They're based basically on United States pastors, and including rogue pastors that don't belong to any organisation, and just say whatever pleases them and tell us that we are going to be invaded by an army of zombies or whatever comes next springs to their mind. And they claim that that's from the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible about zombies, just in case any of you worry about that. I do get people worried about zombies, and they get told by Christian pastors in the United States that zombies are going to take over the world, and they think that's something to do with Christianity. It's not. It's just nutty ideas of nutty pastors and nutty crazy ideas that they scare people with. Anyway, so so the George Fox, who founded the Quakers, and he is of the view that Jesus has already returned, and he's talking back in the 17th century. So way back in the 17th century, he thought of Jesus as already returned, or returning, more strictly returning. He is here, he's on his way here, he's always on his way here. Way into 1,000,000 years from now, he'll be returning. Returning is instantiated in everyone who's Christian, but not just that, in everyone, in the entire world. The entire world is becoming a sacred place constantly as a result of Jesus returning. That's how Quakers think about it. I didn't know that at the time. And that is why Quakers don't have the Eucharist. They don't have the blood and the wine and bread for the blood and body of Jesus that you have in the other churches, because they see him as already returning, as the world already sacred, already instantiating as sacred. And they talk about that of God in everyone, like the sacredness is already here in all of us. And that's basically how Christians think about, how Quakers think about it. So instead of time being linear in Revelation, liberal Christians often talk about building the kingdom of God in earth right now, rather than waiting for heavenly afterlife. And that is how Fox read Revelation, not describing a future in the sky, but as two realities existing side by side, Babylon and New Jerusalem. We're called to come out of Babylon and enter the New Jerusalem in this lifetime. And that's how George Fox interpreted the book of Revelation. So if you think about it that way, then it's not future at all. It's already happened, it is happening, it always is happening, throughout all time, into the future. So that's my thing about George Fox. And so, I mean, let's do an F11 of this. Sorry, that just maximised, I forgot to do that. Now we'll go and look at the Church of Scotland. And the Church of Scotland, they think that they again see it just as a very small thing. There's hardly very much in it in the Westminster Confession. Although it's now treated as a subordinate document. And it just says that all persons of lived on earth should appear towards the tribunal of Christ, and it's not after they are known to men, that he may shake off all carnal security and be always watchful. They always know it. So they say to be ever prepared, but they don't have a date, and there's nothing there about the long end times scenarios that you have, for instance, in the Catholic Church, where there's long things in the future that the Catholics do think is going to happen, but the Catholics think it's going to happen very quickly, and in the very far future, after all of Israel has recognised Jesus, and US Presbyterian. Anyway, I'll talk about a few others there. I don't want to go into great deal of detail, but the main thing is, and then, but most Protestant church are amillennial. They think the tribulation is behind us, and we're currently within a notional 1,000-year period, which obviously lasts many thousand, several thousand years, at least 2,000 already, and of the rule of Jesus, and which they treat as a notional figure rather than an exact time period. And that's the Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, Pentecostalists, the Baptists tend to think about future events, and these are a wide variety of views. Now, the most important thing is that the book of Revelation was written to encourage people, and it's a message of hope for early Christians. It was not meant to scare people, and worst of all, actually I help people via PM who have become suicidal because they're so scared of Jesus returning. And it is not right to be suicidal because of Jesus. That makes no sense. If you're Christian and Jesus is your Saviour, you shouldn't feel suicidal because you're afraid that Jesus is going to return. That literally makes no sense. It's not a sensible idea. But that's how some of these Christian pastors from the Bible Belt who I think they're rogue pastors. They're not really Christian. I don't think it's real Christianity. It can't be Christianity to make your viewers suicidal, and by telling them scary stories about what you think is going to happen when Jesus returns, and telling nothing about God's love and kindness, and about joy and happiness, and about helping others, and generosity and patience. They don't talk about these things. They just say, trust in Jesus, you've got to keep praying to Jesus all your life, and Jesus is going to return, and if you're lucky, then he'll whisk you up to heaven. That's not Christianity, especially when you combine it with ridiculous tales about zombies and aliens and all the other things that they add. So no, that's not Christianity. And then amongst Christians, there's a very wide range. I've sort of touched on some of them. A view that Revelation must be understood in the context of its own time, and already having taken place, and that's like the Church of England, pretty much like that. But most of it, there may be only a portion of the Revelation. So some would say that all have happened, even Jesus' return has happened. That's called preterism. And so there's some Christians, it's not like a particular denomination. In most denominations there'll be a few Christians that have that view. It's a theological interpretation according to which everything has already happened. It's in the past. Then the view that only a portion has occurred, and that's called partial preterism, and that's where, and so many have that view. You could regard the Anglican Church as pretty much all of them having that view, that nearly all has happened, but there's some still to happen. And then there's a view that it's best understood spiritually, and no attempt should be interpreted to interpret in the context of history, and that would be like the Quaker view. And but there'd be various ways, some taking it more symbolic and sometimes taking it actually something really happening in our present day world. That's very instantiated way of understanding it for the Quakers, and some would maybe see a bit more idealistic, ideal, symbolic. And then there's the view that it's prophetic, and that's the view of the Bible Belt Christianity most of all. And that's the idea of political Armageddon, is that last one. So, and then regardless of whether it holds the secret of time and place, that history as we know it will end, it holds the view that how one lives matters greatly, and that's the value of those uses and authority in their life. That will mix the value. And its vision may have been intended primarily to support Christians facing death for their first century faith, but it served a much broader purpose for continuing Christianity. A book of comfort and devotion has called people to faithfulness over the years while assuring them of the faithfulness of the God it proclaims. So that's how you see it. Read with that in mind. Revelation is less frightening and more comforting. Even more, it is more consistent with all that has preceded it, and remains in harmony with the spirit of the spiritual tradition of which it is a part. So, because Christianity is all about love and kindness and generosity and hope, and the book of Revelation should be interpreted in that same way. Now, so I just want to make clear that that I'm not doing this to debunk anyone's beliefs. If you believe in the rapture and you think that Jesus is going to return soon, and that you're going to be wafting up, you're going to be left, I don't mean this in any denigrating way, that you're going to be levitating up into space, and that Jesus is going to appear in space, that you're going to end up in heaven, that's a source of comfort to you. If you believe that, I'm not doing this to debunk that. Not at all, I wouldn't dream of doing that. I'm doing this to help people who get scared, not the people who believe these things. Not the people who find them inspiring. The main thing is, teachings like this are to inspire you and to look at your lives and treat them as more precious and greater value. Inspire us to live better and more meaningful lives. So if it's doing that, then it's fulfilling its path, its role. If it becomes a message of despair and suicide, it's being seriously misapplied. And it is actually, I'm pretty certain that some Christians have committed suicide because they're so scared of Jesus' return as a result of listening to these false prophets from the Bible Belt. And if you end up getting scared, and because there have been people who I've been talking to who are in that state of mind, and if you end up getting scared and upset for no reason, especially repeatedly, I'm sure that can't be Jesus or God's message, and these are false prophecies. They most definitely are false prophecies because there have been so many of them, and they're false because they were for dates that are now in the past. And that they made these prophecies about these past dates shows they are false. So there are numerous, dozens of false, the entire channels on YouTube where people make false prophecies day after day, week after week. There's one particular channel which I've talked about plenty of times, I won't name him this time, but he has these hour-long programs most days I think he has, in which he's prophesying every time. He's prophesying the world ending, and he's got some particular date in mind nearly always. And it's a near future date, just a few days in the future or a few weeks in the future. And this has just been going on ever since I started debunking. Since 2015 he's been doing this. Just new dates after new dates after new dates. And it's clear he doesn't believe these dates. The last one, then he was selling tickets for an event in April next year, while at the same time prophesying the world would end on December 21st, which was leading people to be suicidal about Jesus returning on that date. So how can you believe that? And at the same time be telling $50 tickets for people to attend a conference in April 2021. Doesn't make sense. So he clearly doesn't even believe his own false prophecies. So anyway, so that is not the central message of that is not how the Bible is to be understood. It's a message of hope and comfort and hope. And if they're not teaching it to you like that, then they're not teaching you Christianity. And so now I'm going to look at the views in other religions, because only some Christians believe in the near future end of the world. Most Christians believe in an indefinite future, not in a near future. Very few believe in the near future, because many just take the pragmatic view that that Christians have been around for 2,000 years. Nothing special about this century. Why expect Jesus to return this century? But you expect him to be arrived any moment, because that's a way of inspiring you to continue your life and be. But it's not in the sense. So you can do that, but not in the sense that you literally expect, and you keep on doing your planning for the future. Indeed, the book of Thessalonians, ironically, which people use in order to motivate the rapture, and then trying to persuade people Jesus is going to return, and then leads to people giving up. If you go back to the original sermon in the book of Thessalonians, the 2 Thessalonians, then what Paul was doing, then the people there were giving up back then, and they thought Jesus was going to return. They weren't frightened. In those days, they just thought Jesus was going to return, oh wonderful, and they just stopped working. They were lazing around, doing nothing. And he said to them, don't do that. And he said, just keep going on with your life and plan for the future. And then he taught them about resurrection of the dead, because they were wondering, these people have died since Jesus. And so, what's happened to all the people who've died? I want to go to heaven, and these people have died. And then that was the first teaching in the Bible on the resurrection of the dead. So as they would be able to keep on doing their work and things, and not worry and not expect Jesus to come in their own lifetimes necessarily. And so it's very ironic that the people are now using that passage in order to get people to start thinking that they should give up and that life is hopeless because Jesus is about to return and whatever's done is done, sort of thing. That was the opposite of the meaning of that very passage. Anyway, so Jews and Muslims, they have the same basic background to Christianity, so they also do have end-of-world ideas, but they differ from the Christian ones. For instance, Muslims, they believe it begins from the destruction of Mecca by a thin person from Ethiopia, and Christians don't have that specific prophecy, that anyone from Ethiopia or anything to do with Mecca. And so you have all these different things. Then the Jews, I talk about Jews' prophecies of the Messiah. Jews don't have false prophecies. So with Christians, they're definitely false prophecies, because the Bible says that nobody knows. And it's also got clear warnings against false prophets. But with Jews, then it's a different matter. For Jews, then they actually are encouraged to prophesy the return of their Messiah, and not to worry if it fails. At least in some Jews do that. And this is an example of a rabbi, and he said this is a story about a rabbi. I won't try and pronounce his name. It said about him that he reported that anytime he heard a loud noise, he would say, "Perhaps the Messiah has arrived. The Messiah has arrived." So they had this idea of constant hope. For them, their Messiah is the Christian Jesus. It's like they think that the Christian Jesus hasn't yet happened. So they're looking forward to a future person who's going to bring great peace to the world and bring teachings very much like Christian teachings are seen as being for Christians. So when the Jews prophesy Messiah, they're prophesying peace. And then the two different ideas. One idea is that it's there could be an element of some kind of strife involved before the peace arises, and it could be it's just peaceful, and it's not so much. It's more like the conditions, depending on the conditions in which the Messiah arises. Then he could arise in conditions in which it's just purely peace and nothing happens except peace. And they are talking about really end of war, end of strife, nobody quarrelling, not even. It's hard to know if this meant to be taken literally, but not even predation, not even animals killing each other. Very, very peaceful future, and that's what but some of them I think would take it literally. That's what the Jews think will happen when their Messiah returns. And what's more, the Jewish Messiah is a Messiah for the Jews. They don't think of the Jewish Messiah, so the idea that Jesus was a Messiah for the entire world is a Christian idea. For the Jews, their Messiah is for the Jews. And then they see that them as being like almost like a conduit for God, and then they see the rest of the world as being hugely respectful of the Jews because they're bringing peace to the world through their Messiah. And that's basically how the Jews tend to think of this. I think that's worth knowing because some Christians interpret the Jewish Messiah as being the Antichrist. They think that the Jewish Messiah is going to try and bring Judaism to the entire world, and that this will be Antichrist to Christianity. That's not how the Jews think. They're not trying to convert the rest of the world to their Messiah. Jews are they're not trying to convert people. Jews don't try to convert people. There's some religions that are very into converting other people, and there's some that aren't. And Judaism is one of several religions that have no element of trying to convert others. And so, so that's how the Jews think about it. So it's not a period of peace. It's not a period of tribulation leading to peace. Just peace goes on and on and on. That's how and the reason they don't accept Jesus as the Messiah, because that didn't happen. And he just says this every year. It's not a prophecy. So this is well worth knowing, because the Jews are constantly not just some rabbis constantly prophesying, and they say it's positive to do this, and they don't see it as something that's in any way. There are no teachings in the Bible saying not to do this. If you just look at the Old Testament and the Torah, it's only if you look at the New Testament and they see that as positive, and so maybe that's why. Anyway, so and so on the whole, the end of the world is not exactly a Jewish concept. The Jews are waiting for the arrival of the Messiah, which will mark not some terrible end of the world, but on the contrary, the beginning of a new beautiful era, although before that terrible events may occur. And anyway, the specific events of this future are not hidden from us accidentally. We should pay attention not only to various prophecies, but also to the lack of specific data. And they say not to indulge in such speculations, but to make life in that world where we are now, and study the Torah, observe the commandments, improve our character, try to be worthy people. And from this point, that is the knowledge that some cataclysm coming, or even a positive reformatting of the world that doesn't benefit man at all. Why build something today if there's no certainty all this will remain safe tomorrow? So it gives us the feeling the world as it is now is stable. We can do something and build in life, and also give birth and raise children with a certain healthy degree of confidence in the future. But at the same time, they believe that the Messiah will eventually come, because life is still not ideal. And so it goes on. It's something to hope for and to strive for. No matter how desperate the situation seems to be in terms of the problems listed, it's not a dead end. The Messiah will come. It can come at any moment. Exactly how how things will be, we do not know. And so far we continue to pursue our vision. So, and they could be going on to that for a million years, and that's very positive. So it's actually it's hardly likely anything does happen, because it's politically and practically very unlikely that any single human being would be accepted as the Messiah by all the Jews. It would be very remarkable indeed. But the Jews have this belief for the future, constant belief, and they believe in coming at any moment, and it's very positive in their lives. And who's to say that they're not right? But remember, when you hear people talking about the Jewish Messiah, it's someone of peace that they're thinking about, and then whether there be other events that happen on the way there. But there's it is some definite possibility it's entirely peaceful, according to them. So that's what the Jews believe. And then, now, you may have already got this from what I've been saying, that the views in the Bible are not constant. And if you can actually theologically look at it and trace it back, it actually goes back as the early Sumerian beliefs before the beginning of the Old Testament. And if you go look through the Old Testament, the beliefs are changing. And so, a very simple thing is that they originally thought the world was flat, and they had different ideas about the heaven. The blue sky there was a kind of floor on top of that for angels, and then there's lots of questions about whether the rain was on top of the sky or below the sky. and then they sort of pour it down onto the ground from above. That gradually, on a flat Earth, and that gradually evolved the idea that the Earth was round, and that by the time of the Romans and the New Testament, they definitely knew the world was round. And so that's just the evolving, and it's similarly got evolving ideas, belief, for instance, their beliefs on whether there's life after death. That's very slowly evolving over the entire duration of the Old Testament, and it's still quite vague. Indeed, to this day, the Jews have a much less clear idea about that than the Christians do. And then in Christianity, we saw already that the resurrection of the dead, for instance, was not in the original four central Gospels, but was in the wherever it was, the 2 Thessalonians. That's when that was first introduced. And Christianity continues to evolve since then. And you have these things going back. And then so one of the very early stories is from Noah's flood. That goes all the way back to the Sumerians. That predates the Bible. And some of the most ancient literature in the world includes the Noah's flood. So you can look at that like that. And Judaism is gradually evolves like that out of previous religions. And then if you look at, for instance, how, like for instance, there's things in the Bible about how to treat a slave properly. They didn't have the idea of emancipation of slaves. They didn't have the idea of decent treatment of slaves. And so that is a thing of its time. It doesn't mean that nowadays it's okay to have slaves and people who have slaves should treat them decently, and if you're a slave that you should expect to be treated decently by your master. That's not the lesson to learn from that. That is more that those were teachings that back then were helping moving in the direction, and we've moved much further in that direction. And we've now got completed. We don't have anything like slavery is no longer acceptable. So, just as so you look at that as a historical document, as something that's changing, and to a future belief, and that's where we are now, and it can keep on changing. And in that way, whatever it is that is inspiring the Bible is something that is constantly coming into our lives, and is something that's living now. And you don't need to be fettered by what the Bible says about this or that or the next thing. It's something that's evolving. It's got to be grounded in the Bible, but it doesn't have to be fettered by the Bible. And so that's kind of, I think that's probably what they mean by liberal theology. I'm not sure, but you get the very but even the most fundamentalist people, Christians, don't take the teachings on slavery, for instance, and say these should be applied today. And the various other things, they don't take the teachings on angels storing rain in cisterns above the sky and say that's got to be applied today. So even them, they accept that to some extent. They're just more they're more limited in how much they're not non-libertarian, whatever the word is. They're just somewhat more restricted. They don't let things evolve quite so much as in other branches of Christianity. But I don't think there's anyone who is going around saying that the rain, whenever the rain falls, it's angels pouring rain out of cisterns either above or below heaven, and having learned arguments about are the cisterns above the sky, or is the rain in a kind of thick layer of water below the sky? And we don't get learned discussions about that anymore. So the beliefs do change. It's something from the past, and so that's something I think is quite important to realise. And this rapture is another idea that's coming in, that's changing in the United States, but there are other ideas coming out in other places. And the Quaker idea that Jesus is always instantiating in the world, then that came in the 17th century, and there would have been precursors before then, and always are. There usually are some kind of precursors a little while back anyway, and in that way it's constantly evolving. And Christians will believe that there's an inspiration behind all this. So the inspiration of God and the inspiration of Jesus is behind all this. But we have very little actual words of Jesus in the Bible. With some religious figures, you have pages, almost an encyclopedia of their writings. But for Jesus, there's only a few thousand words in the actual Gospels of the actual words of Jesus. And so it's really quite limited what we actually have there, which maybe in some ways is good because he would be speaking very much to the people of his time, and perhaps if we had all those details, and be little not so easy for it to be such a living presence today. Who knows? But anyway, we don't, and even those words are kind of hearsay, written down much later, and we didn't have, even though they had writing, for some reason, they didn't seem to be writing it down when he was talking, or if they did, that hasn't been saved, hasn't been preserved. There didn't seem to be people sitting in the audience while Jesus was writing down what he said, or if they did, then whatever they wrote down hasn't survived. So, so it's okay to do this comparative study. I think it's important to realise that the Bible is not a single thing; it's an evolving thing, and all the way through. In all the books, they're not written by a single author. They have the same inspiration, according to Christians, but they're not. There's an evolution. There's changing of society, changing of the message, and changing of the people receiving the messages, and the two go together. And then the thing is, the Bible is only one of many Christians in the scriptures in the world. The Hindus, the Hindu Vedas, they go back nearly as far as the Old Testament. They preserve thousands of years by word study. I mean, they're older than most of the books in the Old Testament. And then, if you look at the oldest things in the Old Testament, and they go back to Sumerians, and whether the Vedas go back that far, I'm not sure. I think the Sumerians somewhat beat them, but it's quite a close tie. But they memorized them, but they, over this very long time periods of time, they memorized them. So the Hindus have the idea of a kind of cyclic world, but on hugely vast future timescales. And once the world is destroyed, a new one arises, but over and over again, over and over and over and over and over and over. And this is just the last of many going back in the past. So that's how Hindus think about it, and the entire universe, world systems. And Buddhists have a similar idea. And it's really quite a simple, certainly for Buddhists, it's quite a simple basic thing behind it, that we find that everything in life falls apart eventually, and then new things arise from them. And so it makes sense that the entire world, that eventually will happen. It's obviously not imminently falling apart. We're talking about vast time scales. And then now we know more from science that we can see that, for instance, we've got so many billion years before the sun starts to become a red giant. But then we look at the various ways of the Earth, we could be, civilization could survive beyond that. And then there's the vast future of the universe, and then there's different questions as to what happens over those vast time scales, the entire universe, and whether there's rejuvenation into a new universe, or whether we can just continue endlessly in this one. So even then, if we did, there would be things arising and things falling away within this universe. So Buddhists have the idea, it's just basic idea that things do fall apart. So expect that eventually to happen in the entire universe. So that's quite a simple basis for that. But on vast time scales. But Buddhists don't think of the sacred texts as laying down things that you have to believe. It's particularly easy for Buddhists to transition to the scientists and astronomers, because the teachings of the Buddha are very much about opening out to the truth wherever you find it. So you find the truth, you meditate, you listen to what the Buddha taught, you find out in your own experience and tested everything in your own experience. And you don't just listen to Buddhists, you listen to all religions, but you're following a particular path, and Buddhism helps in the sense that you're following the path of the Buddha. So, but this particular approach that I'm following, and that Buddhists follow, is to do with finding truth wherever it is. And that's the central teaching. It's not about finding truth in sacred texts, particularly. You test everything. So but you test them not against your habitual habits and just oh, this sounds good to me because I've got a gut feeling about it. It's not like that. You test it properly, including testing against people who are wise, people who have got deep insight, and so on. And so that's where the actual sacred texts of the Buddhists are to do with the teachings of people who are wise. You can then test things against. So you listen to that. You listen to all the truths you find, and but they're not saying believe this because I said it. They're saying look in your own experience. Do you find this? And so that's the way Buddhists practice their religion. So I don't know much about other religions, but there are lots of them. There's Taoism, ancestor worship, shamanistic idea, Aborigines and Dreamtime. But many of these, like for instance the Mayans, and people are very scared about the Mayans. The Mayans have an origin story. They don't have an end of time story. And I think that's true of many of these religions. It's just made up. Christians, they tend to think in terms of the end time story, so they just slotted one into they read some of the Mayan texts and reinterpret them as being an end time story when there isn't one. It's a case of seeing what you're familiar with. And so anyway, so this is about when I'm asked to debunk prophecies based on the rapture. So I can't debunk them in the way I do the other prophecies, like when they say that there's going to be an asteroid impact, or when they say, well, they are prophecies, they're predictions, or fake news stories. So if the false prophets do talk about astronomical things as planets, I can debunk those. And I can also say there's no mention of astronomy in the Bible, and there's no mention of planets or constellations of the zodiac in the Bible. Not only that, they even, if I should put in there, they even passage in the Bible sort of basically warning against this astrology. And people who do astrology who are also Christian, then they have to say, well, our astrology isn't the kind that was forbidden in the Bible, that was warned against in the Bible. And they try and work out why theirs is different. There's certainly no support of astrology in the Bible. And so all these people make astrological predictions of the future based on the zodiac and signs and conjunctions and things. That's very unbiblical. That's deeply against the central things in the Bible. Whether it actually totally forbids that sort of thing, it's where there's nuances, whether it says you shouldn't do it at all, or whether you should only not do specific types of astrology. It certainly doesn't support it. It doesn't present astrology, and there's no way there's a hidden astrology message in the Bible. That makes no sense. And so, anyway, so I can say things like that, but and then talk about different interpretations of the Bible, about how the original people who listen to the Bible would not only wouldn't believe this, but they wouldn't even have a clue what you're talking about. And so that's my aim, is to help those. So as I say once more, I've said it before, I have no wish to debunk the people who find comfort in this idea of Jesus returning quickly and believing in the rapture and all that. But this is to help those of you who get very scared by it. I hope this video has given you some context to perhaps see and have a wider view, and perhaps manage to make that transition, if you're a Christian, to actually really seeing Jesus as being a saviour, and that he's here he's to help you, and that this is something that could be a support in your life if you're a Christian. And then if you're not Christian, then just to help you understand that this is one religion of many, and really there's nothing here that should scare you at all. If you're following a particular path, then then the beliefs in that religious system can help you along that path. And then if you're in a different religious system, or you're not following a religious path at all, if you're a humanist, or if you're finding your own path in life, and you're or something else that you find inspiring, then these are teaching for someone else. Jesus' teachings are for Christians, and they're not really teachings for non-Christians. There are teachings for non-Christians who are interested in becoming Christian, and I think most Christians nowadays think of them like that, and they respect other religions, and they think Muslim teachings are for Muslims, and the Buddhist teachings are for Buddhists, and Hindu teachings are for Hindus, and that these different religions can respect each other, appreciate each other, and you can do that without having to say, well, you're wrong because my religion says this and yours says that. And that is very conceptual, up in our mind, always in the headspace. And really the central point of all the religions is the same, which is to do with not harming others, not harming yourself, and then benefiting others and benefiting yourself, in the sense of finding positive ways forward in your life. And that is central in all the religions, and that would be a central point. I don't think you would find any of the major religions that would say there's something wrong with what I just said there. That you follow basic morality to not harming others, and not harming yourself, and showing kindness and generosity to others, and to yourself, and leading a positive life, and doing something that's beneficial and worthwhile. If you're doing all that, then you are already fulfilling the central teachings of all the major religions, and that's what it's all about, really. And if you're really in that space, and so you get some people who are able to be in several religions at once. There's Sister McInnes, who is a Catholic nun, who is also a Zen Roshi, which is quite, it means that she's had a basic insight of the central point of Zen teaching, and she's able to teach the Zen teaching at a very, very high level to other Zen practitioners. And so she is in both traditions, and she doesn't see any contradiction there. If you were to go very detailed and look at them, well, the Catholics say this, and Buddhists say this, and how do you fit those together? But these people don't see it like that. And so it is possible, if you can get that central point, that's where it's all at. If you're really in that core, if your heart is in that central place, then you no longer see these big distinctions between all these religions, and you're in a place where really that's the essential point, and the rest is really quite superficial, really. And so if you find these things scary, I mean, just go to that central point. The more you're in that central point, then that's the easiest way to relate to all the religions, and to show and have respect for them all. But if you want to follow a particular religion, follow a particular path. So we have this thing in Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, and what's called Rime, without boundaries. And this is about keeping all the different religious paths distinct and clear. So if you're teaching, someone who's a very good Rime practitioner, then there are 4 different branches of Tibetan Buddhism, and they are as different as the major branches of Christianity, like the difference between Catholicism and the Pentecostalists and the Anglicans and Eastern Orthodox, say. So there are 4 different branches in Tibetan Buddhism that to people who are not Tibetan Buddhists in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they all look very similar. They have the very similar looking ceremonies. They talk in similar ways, but they are actually very different versions of Tibetan Buddhism. Very, very different ideas, and in some of the central ideas. And so you get Rime masters in Tibet, in Tibetan Buddhism, who have mastered all 4, and the Dalai Lama is an example, that he has mastered all 4 of the traditions. So he's almost like he's both Catholic, Anglican, Eastern Orthodox and Pentecostalist, say, all at the same time, and he's teaching simultaneously. He can teach in any of those. So he could just go and teach in any of those different branches of Christianity. So he's like that in Tibetan Buddhism. And the remade people say that the important thing is to keep the ideas clear and distinct in each tradition. So if you're teaching Catholics, don't teach them like an Anglican. If you're teaching Anglicans, don't teach them like a Catholic. The important thing is to keep it distinct in each religion. And then, so the Rime is about keeping that distinct, but then at the same time, individuals who are practicing that path, then they can take things that benefit their practice from any tradition in any religion. So there's a very big distinction between people who are practicing. So as a Buddhist, I can get things from any Christianity. I can get things from shamanism, or from any tradition that I might, for instance, from the Hawaiian native religion or the Aborigines. There's something there that I find inspiring, and there's no reason why I shouldn't use that to help with my own practice. But if I was a teacher, which I'm not, I'm teaching Buddhism, then I would make it clear what Buddhist teachings are, and I would be teaching within a particular tradition of Buddhism and make it clear what that particular tradition teachings are. And then I could bring in different things as well. But if you just make very clear what you're teaching at any time. And so this is quite a good way of looking at all the religions, I think, and of just being very appreciative of the other religions, but not feeling that you have to. What you don't do is take a little bit, some of the ideas from Christianity, some of the ideas from Buddhism, some of the ideas from Hinduism, some of the ideas from Taoism, mix them together and make a new religion, and then start teaching that. So there are people who do that as well, but if you do that, be very clear that's a new religion, and you're basically setting up an entire new religion. You're not finding a unified religion behind them all. You're setting up a new religion of your own if you do that. If you start teaching a new way that takes bits from different religions. So anyway, I'll stop at this point. That's quite long, but I think if you've got the end, then I hope you found this quite interesting. And I certainly found researching into this quite interesting. Anyway, it's really quite, over the last few years, while debunking and helping people scared, and it's really been quite interesting finding out about all these different belief systems, and how people think. It was only quite recently that I discovered, for instance, about how the Jews think about their future Messiah, and that's quite interesting. So anyway, look, hope this helps you, and the main thing is hope it helps some of you be less scared and more understanding, and if you're a Christian, to think of Jesus as something positive. And anyway, I'll upload this now and see what you make of it.